Welcome to Good Faith Reads. I'm your host, Cliff Vaughn at Good Faith Media. Good Faith Reads is a short podcast in which we focus on one of our book authors at Good Faith Media. We've published a considerable library of titles, and we invite you to check them out at goodfaithmedia.org/shop. Today's guest is retired U.S. Army Chaplain Colonel Charlie Reynolds, author of A Quest for Warrior Priests, Enlisting Warriors as Healers and Peacebuilders. He's joining us remotely from Tigerville, South Carolina. Charlie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Cliff. It's great to be with you today, and I'm grateful for this opportunity to share about my book.
Yeah, well, it's a wonderful book, and let's just get right into it. You talk a lot about evangelism in the book, but maybe evangelism not in the way that many people would probably think. So what does evangelism mean to you in the context of military chaplaincy?
I'd like to begin by quoting Paul Baxley, the executive coordinator for Corporate Baptist Fellowship, and sort of paraphrase what he wrote in his recommendation of the book. He said, anyone serving in ministry will find a deeper understanding of how to bear witness to love and power of God by reading this book. Anyone dealing with conflicts between individuals, between groups of people, or anyone just simply wanting to share God's love can benefit from reading this book. So even though this book comes from a military context, it is not just for military. It's for any minister, any person. And, we believe in priesthood of the believer. So that's everybody. So I think this is a book that would be helpful to anyone in sharing God's love that wants to do that.
I can attest to the fact that you don't have to have been a member of the military in order to enjoy it and appreciate it and see where you're going. But say a little bit more about evangelism. Yeah.
Right. Well, it's been my experience that I have stumbled into God's will more than I've walked into it. And that was certainly true of this book. My first job out of college, I was a journeyman in Innsbruck, Austria, and I worked under a man by the name of Bill Wagner. And Bill and Sally Wagner treated me just like a son. And we became lifelong friends. About 10 years ago, Bill was writing a book on evangelism. And he asked me if I would write a chapter on a strategic plan for evangelizing the military. And I really wanted to say no, because evangelism was not my area of expertise. I was a world religions instructor. I was a peace builder. That's what I did my last few years in the military, was peace building. But I couldn't tell the man no. And so I said yes, and I hung up the phone, and I had brain cramp for 3 months. And I thought, what am I going to write on? And then all of a sudden it hit me how much evangelism is like peace building, but it gives evangelism a whole different nuance. Because one of the reasons I was uncomfortable with evangelism, I just didn't like some of the evangelism techniques that I had seen used. But when you begin to look at evangelism as you look at peace building, evangelism is really about healing relationships. And so I define evangelism as helping people to grow in their love for God and their love for each other. And any time that you do that, you are doing evangelism, because it's not about some intellectual decision, or it's not about quoting some theological statement. It's about helping people grow in their relationship with God, their relationship with one another. And so I think a lot of people that have been turned off by evangelism can read this book and find a whole new exciting way of looking at it, and maybe wanting to do it in a way that they haven't before. And I make this state also one of the purposes of my book. I'm a fellow at George Mason University, a Center for World Religions, Diplomacy, and Conflict Resolution. And we're trying to heal the rift in America right now, particularly with Christians. And so I make this statement in my book. I said, my conservative friends are so repulsed by the verbiage and acts of some liberals, they can't see God in any of them. And the same is true. My liberal friends are so repulsed by the verbiage and action of some conservatives, they can't see God in any of them. And we have to be able to see God in each other. And I deliberately in this book share experiences of working with very conservative Christians and very liberal Christians, because I want people to see that God is bigger than the boxes we try to confine him to. And I believe in peace building, what you do is you try to find the common ground. And I believe the common ground is that we all want to share God's love. And so this book is about how I have shared God's love in very unique ways and in very diverse environments. And so I think this makes this book exciting, makes it different, makes it something new and refreshing.
Yeah. And it sounds like your work as a fellow at George Mason Maybe Christians have to start by evangelizing other Christians.
Exactly. Well, I also made the statement that I'm in the group that I'm in, another group called Global Strategy Forum. I'm probably the most liberal. I'm sure I'm the most liberal person in that group. I'm probably the most conservative person at George Mason's.
We're glad you're in the circles you're in. Let's back out a little bit from evangelism specifically and just talk more generally about what the book is about. Give us a brief overview.
The book has a lot of my stories and a lot of stories from other chaplains, but it was my intent not to make the book about us, but about what God has done through us. And so I start the book by sharing three stories that to me very clearly show situations that God worked through that only could have happened had it not been for his presence. And that's really what I'm trying to share in this book is how God's presence is so important in everything we do and not trying to do things, force things, but to allow his spirit to work with us. And I also that I have a chapter on the theology of it. By the way, I use the word enlistment because the word evangelism does not sit well, especially in the military. And so enlistment is a very good term in the military. So I talk about enlistment, and so I give a theology of enlistment, and I really see the Bible as being built on two basic principles: love for God and love for a fellow man. And that fits very well with my definition of evangelism. And I think it's really very closer to what Jesus intended evangelism to be. And so this book is, I also have a chapter in the book that talks about some of the boundaries that we need to be careful of when we're enlisting. And it's very important, especially in the military environment, to honor those boundaries and not try to push those boundaries. And then I also have a chapter where I list all the religious groups that work with military. And I think that's a valuable resource, and particularly for chaplains, but I think just anybody who is uh, interested in military and military ministry to be able to have this. I don't know that I have every group, but I have over 80 groups, and I have them from all faith groups. And so I think that makes this book a very valuable resource as well. And I do share some strategies for sharing God's love in the military environment.
Yeah, we'll come back to that list of groups that work with the military later because it's a significant part of the book, I would say, and I want to circle back to that in just a little while. But let's stick on the theme of peace building. It's something you talk about a lot in the book, and on page 75 specifically, you have a subheading called "Peace Builders Must Understand How Culture Changes Religion." And I think that line can probably ruffle some feathers. It doesn't ruffle mine, but I know it would some people. Can you explain what you mean by that?
I can understand. I have ruffled some feathers in my day, but I always, when I taught special forces cross-cultural interaction, I always started with this story. I was my commander's liaison to the Serbian Orthodox priest, the Catholic Croatian priest, and the Muslim imam in the city of Brčko, which was right in the middle of the fighting in the zone of separation. And I would meet with the Muslims, and every time I met with them, they would serve me rakia, which is plum brandy that's about 40 proof. And, and so finally one day I had gotten to know them pretty well. I said, you guys are Muslims and you drink rakia. And they said, oh, we're European Muslims. And so when I met with the head imam in Tuzla, I couldn't resist asking him. I said, your parishioners tell me they can drink rakia because they're European Muslims. He says, they're not European Muslims, they're bad Muslims. And so I would ask my class who was correct. Well, if you study Islam, you know that Islam absolutely forbids alcohol. But if you look at Islam as it is practiced in Bosnia Herzegovina, it is they do. In fact, a lot of them converted because if they didn't convert to Islam, they had to pay higher taxes. So they do their five prayers every day. They go to the pilgrimage on Mecca if they can afford it. They do all the outward appearances of Islam, but culturally they are European. I preached in a church in Africa that was a Presbyterian church. All the order of worship was exactly like a Presbyterian church in the United States, except the music was much better. They got up and danced and sang, and it was great. Uh, but in this corner, in the one section of the church, there was an altar where they brought food for their ancestors. because that practice is so deeply ingrained in African culture. In fact, they don't believe their ancestors are actually dead. They just believe they're living with them in a different form. And so not to honor your ancestors just is unthinkable. And so these are just two examples of how culture influences religion and religion influences culture. My advisor at Princeton, Dr. Richard Finn, the first thing he said to me is, Charlie, you cannot separate religion and culture, and you can't. In fact, American culture is very heavily influenced by the business culture. I mean, churches have quotas. They have goals. You have to, they keep track of numbers, baptisms, all these kinds of, that comes from the business world. Not any of that is really in the Bible. It's not it's something that's there's no way that the two are not going to affect each other, and they do. And I think what's important is to recognize that, and to say, okay, I think that's what Jesus was talking about when he said you can't put old wine in new wineskins. The message of the gospel has to change to some degree to the culture that it's being presented to. The key is trying to keep the wine pure, and that's where we're all challenged.
Wonderful examples. Thank you. We'll be right back with more Good Faith Reads.
I'm Mitch Randall, CEO of Good Faith Media. We're a nonprofit dedicated to inclusion for all, freedom for all, and justice for all. And we invite you to support us in this work by becoming a Good Faith Advocate. Everyone who donates $50 or more per year becomes a Good Faith Advocate. You'll get our free quarterly magazine, discounts at our bookstore, access to other exclusive content, and much more. You'll also be supporting media content and journalism that makes a difference. Consider becoming a Good Faith Advocate today at goodfaithmedia.org.
Welcome back to Good Faith Reads. Today we're joined remotely by Charlie Reynolds, author of the Good Faith Media book, A Quest for Warrior Priests, Enlisting Warriors as Healers and Peacebuilders. I'm Cliff Vaughn of Good Faith Media. Charlie, can you talk a bit about your writing process? What worked for you, what was challenging, and so forth?
Fortunately, I had taken a lot of notes from my military experience, and some of the most important things that happened I had already written down. I think I told you how the book came to be. It was just sort of an accident. In fact, when I wrote this chapter for Bill Wagner, I had a lot more research than I could put into one chapter. And so it was Bill suggested, why don't you write a book? And it was for the most part, it was a fun process. The only painful part was getting it published, but thank goodness Good Faith Media came through and for me and that happened. So, but I had a lot of people. I consulted a lot of people and asked their opinions. I had different people to read it. I wanted to see how different readers would respond to some of the things that were in it. And so I had other people to help me edit and look at it. And I think that was a wise choice, because by the time it got to Good Faith Media, there was very little editing that needed to be done. So that was good. So,
well, I'm curious, you mentioned that you had taken a lot of notes. Was that something that you did? Was that a daily activity, a weekly? Did you keep a diary throughout your years in the military? How did you, had you gone back and taken notes later?
I started a spiritual diary when I first became a Christian when I was six years old. The man, the evangelist who led me to make the decision to become a Christian, suggested I do that. And so I've had that. Now, when I got in the military, I couldn't do it every day. Okay. There were some days when you were so tired, you just hit the bed and went to sleep, so it wasn't at that point necessarily daily, but it was pretty consistent.
That's great. That's great. You mentioned previously a section of the book that is it categorizes groups that support the military in various ways. And I want to come back to that, because when you're talking about groups that support military chaplains and the nature of military chaplaincy, you say this, and I'm quoting: "The conservative evangelistic religious community has the most influence on military personnel because they have invested the most in ministering to military personnel and their families," end quote. So I'm wondering, maybe you can elaborate on that a little bit more, and then talk about some of the consequences of that that readers or listeners might be interested to know.
One of the things I want to do with this book is sort of prod the more moderate Christian community to be more pro-military. That it's an outstanding ministry, and it's something that is so needed. Our military needs moderate chaplains. Right now, the counseling note of our CBF chaplains is overwhelming because in the current environment, many people don't feel safe, and they feel safe with their chaplains. But unfortunately, almost all the chaplain training for chaplains is done by your more conservative seminaries. Almost all the ministry that's done in the military are your much more conservative groups. And so part of this group is to sort of hopefully light a fire under some of our more moderate seminaries. This is something a ministry that you need to do a better job of preparing students for, because they're really doing very little. And also, I want to raise the awareness of our churches. One of the things I've started as the endorser for Corporate Baptist Fellowship is I'm trying to get churches to sponsor military members, because I supervise over 90 chaplains. There's no way I can give them the kind of ministry they need. And so I have now about 30 churches who are paired up with their military chaplains and can provide ministry for them. But it's also raising the awareness of the churches of the importance of military. And I'm a great fan of Martin Luther King Jr., of Mahatma Gandhi, of peace builders who are passive people. But when an active shooter has a gun, he's not going to be stopped by passive resistance. And both in daily shootings like that, but also in the world, there are evil people who, if they're not stopped, they're going to do a lot of harm to a lot of people. I look at what's happening in Ukraine right now. And so I believe that the warrior priest is a divine calling. And I want more moderate persons who maybe think that all war is bad or are uncomfortable with military in general. In fact, when I first came into the chaplaincy, I was pastoring a church, and one of my pastor friends came to me and said, "Charlie, why are you leaving the ministry?" And I want the readers of this book to see that the warrior priest is a calling of God. It's a hard calling. It's a difficult calling. Most of us have scars, mental scars, from some of the things we've had to deal with. And but it's a very necessary calling, and it's one that I am confident that God calls persons to be warrior priest. And I think in some sense everyone should be a warrior priest. A warrior priest is one who resists evil but brings healing and redemption to God's world. So they play both roles. And I think there's a sense in which everybody should be a warrior priest.
An important note to all of our listeners, we at Good Faith Media are always accepting book proposals. Our authors engage with an experienced team of editors, designers, and marketers to produce and sell books on a variety of topics. If you have a book proposal you'd like to run by us, head on over to goodfaithmedia.org for more information. Last question, Charlie. Would you read a passage from the book that you think is critical for listeners to hear, either because it represents the book in your mind or because you think it's just especially important for folks to hear right now?
I'm going to go read a section called My Epiphany.
Yeah.
This was explaining how I came to the understanding that I share in this book. So my epiphany was this: anytime I help someone to heal an estranged relationship, or to reconcile with someone they have hated, or when I simply facilitate love for others, this is evangelism. Every time that I help someone to heal from the pain of a broken relationship, or the pain of feeling estranged from God, I am doing evangelism. Every time I help someone love God who has never loved him, or has been estranged from him for a long time, I'm helping them to grow in their love for him. And that's evangelism. Evangelism is not about persuading someone to accept a theological statement. Evangelism is helping people to grow in their love for God and their love for each other. It is in these moments that kingdom is birthed. Such moments are expressed in the Bible by the Hebrew word kabod, which means holy. But the literal meaning is heavy and weighty. It's that heavy, weighty presence of God. It's a profound manifestation of God's presence. Richard Ward describes it this way: the core message of the incarnation of God in Jesus is that the divine presence is here in us.
Our guest today on Good Faith Reads has been retired U.S. Army Chaplain Colonel Charlie Reynolds, author of A Quest for Warrior Priests, Enlisting Warriors as Healers and Peacebuilders. The book, along with many other titles, is available at goodfaithmedia.org/shop. Charlie, we appreciate you being our guest today, and we thank you for your service.
Thank you.